Alright, in this video we're going to cover T.4.A, which is trig functions with the calculator. Alright, so you are finally going to get to use the calculator, and we're going to do degrees and radians, and this time we can do any angle at all. It doesn't have to be on the unit circle because we're going to use the calculator to find it. Alright, when we're doing these problems, it is very important that your calculator is in the correct mode, and you're going to have to be able to change it back and forth for degrees and radians. So, if you have a Casio and you're just on the regular run screen where you can do operations, you're going to click Shift and Menu because we want that setup option. And then you're going to go down to where it says Angle, and you can choose degrees or radians, whatever the problem is asking you for. Alright, if you have a TI calculator, you're going to click this Mode button and then scroll down, and there's your options, radian or degrees. So you pick the one you want, press Enter, and then second quit to get back to your main screen. Okay, so you're going to have to go back and forth a lot depending on what question you're working on, whether it's degrees or radians. Alright, and then to calculate a trig function, you did this before in geometry. So you have sine, cosine, and tangent buttons. And then if we want one of the inverse trig functions, so if you're going to do cosecant, you would be 1 over sine and then type in the angle. So 1 over sine of 25. That would give you the cosecant of 25. So let's do a couple to practice. They want the sine of 30 degrees. So first thing I need to do is make sure that my calculator is in degrees. It's in radians right now, so I have to change it. Alright, and so sine of 30 degrees would be 0.5. Cosine of 45. Cosine 45. 0.7071. So for our purposes in this class, we're going to round everything to 4 decimal places. So I would write 0.7071. Let's try one of the inverse ones. So cosecant of 210 would be 1 over the sine of 210. And I get -2. Secant of 270 would be 1 over the cosine of 270. So when you do the inverse, it's 1 over. It says math error. Well, that's because the secant of 270 is undefined. So this, we would write undefined. That's what gives me an error. Alright, then we're going to try a couple, same thing with radians. So I'm going to change my mode back to radians. Okay, and then with the sine of pi over 2. So I'm going to type sine, and I'm going to put anything in radians when it's a fraction in parentheses. So pi, which is in yellow above that EXP key. So I'd do shift pi over 2. Okay, you can do divided by 2, you can use the fraction key, it really doesn't matter. Sine of pi over 2 is 1. Alright, cosine of 8 pi over 3. So cosine, and again I'm going to put it in parentheses, 8 pi over 3, and I get -0.5. Just to show you how important it is that your calculator is in the right mode. So right now, my calculator is in radians. So if I were to find the tangent of 30 radians, I get -6.4053. But if I wanted the tangent of 30 degrees, so let me change back to degrees, and I did tangent of 30, I get 0.5774. So these are two very different numbers, even though we typed in the same thing. So you have to make sure that your calculator is in the right mode every time you're doing these problems. Then the second thing we're going to do with the calculator is we're going to do inverse trig functions. So in the other problems, we knew the measurement of the angle, and we were trying to find the value of the trig function. So we knew it was 30 degrees, and we were trying to find sine, cosine, tangent of 30 degrees. Now we're going to go backwards. We're going to know the value of the trig function, and we're looking for the angle measurement. So if I tell you the sine is 1/2, what would the angle measurement have to be? Alright, and we can do that with the inverse key on the calculator. Okay, so here they give us sine of 0.866. So I know that the sine is 0.866, and I want to know what the angle measurement is. And they tell me it's in radians, so let me make sure that my calculator is in radians. Alright, and here is how we're going to do sine -1, which is in yellow above the sine key. So I'm going to do shift sine 0.866. and it gives me 1.0471 radians. Okay, so same thing, cosine, I would do shift cosine 0.866, and I get 0.5236, and that would be my answer. That is the measurement of the angle in radians. When we do the inverse trig function, so cosecant, we're going to do the 1 over after the trig function. So the opposite of cosecant is sine. So I'm going to do shift to sine, I want the inverse sine, and then I'm going to do 1 over whatever value they give me. So 1 over 0.866. And again, I'm going to put that in parentheses. Alright, it tells me math error, so that would be undefined. Alright, if I was going to do secant, it would be the cosine, so shift cosine, 1 divided by 0.866, and that's undefined as well. Let's try the cotangent one. Alright, and that gives me 0.8571 radians. Okay, so when you're doing the inverse trig functions and then the inverse value, you got to put the 1 over part inside the parentheses. Okay, and that's really it. Helpful hints, make sure your calculator's in the right mode. Alright, I would make sure that you're using parentheses. If I were you, I would just get in the habit of using parentheses every time. If you have a TI, anytime you press a trig function button, it's going to open a set of parentheses for you automatically. If you have a Casio, I would just get in the habit of doing it all the time. Anytime you have a fraction, you're going to need those parentheses. Alright, and then remember, we are going to round answers to 4 decimal places.